You might stumble upon a phrase that a soldier fights truly not because he hates everyone who's in front of him, but just because some Serbian just killed an Austrian somewhere in the Balkans. May that be a joke, but it has a grain of truth, isn't it? Can you outline the causes of the Second World War? Pacification policy or German expansionism, unjust system of international relations, or maybe Hitler's problematic childhood as well? Which ones and how much these have influenced the killings of people from the Far East to North Africa throughout a 7-year period? Trying to research the causes of the war is taxing and not that rewarding, to be honest. At least you can't even accurately define the importance of separate facts. But to let conspirologists explain this conflict is the same as delegating control of your life to an astrologist. So let's dive in. Expressing our opinion about the possible catalyst of the war, we can help mentioning the position of the Russian government, which was declared at the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Putin's quote in his speech on 24th February on Ukraine: "We had to stop that atrocity, that genocide of the millions of people who live there and who pinned their hopes on Russia, on all of us. It is their aspirations, the feelings, and the pain of these people that were the main motivating force behind our decision to recognize the independence of Donbass People's Republics." United Nations defines genocide as action that are taken to eliminate some kind of national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. Now, I'd like to draw your attention to a few figures. According to the United Nations, the number of victims of citizens in Donbass reached 25 people in 2021. The death of each person is a serious loss. But does a full-scale invasion solve such a problem? Since the beginning of the invasion, more than 10,000 citizens have lost their lives. War is a continuation of policy, applying different methods, and rarely had it been declared with the highest aspirations. But in the 21st century, these claims sound extremely cynical. Now, let's talk about more realistic catalysts of this conflict. The state takes any action for two reasons. First, government considers that this conflict is in its own national interest. And the second one, it seems to state that it has enough resources for it. But what is the Russian government? Let's clear this out. Let's turn to the non-governmental organization Freedom House, Ukraine. It's partially a free country, with a quote from Freedom House: "No formal barriers to the creation and operation of political parties. Ukrainian politics feature dynamic competition among parties, while power in Russia's authoritarian political system is concentrated in the hands of President Vladimir Putin. The Kremlin is able to manipulate the elections and suppress genuine dissent." As a result, on the one hand, we have a partially free country that follows the path of democracy, and dictatorship on the other. Oh God, someone's calling me. Oh. Yes, Mr. Blinken. Yeah, State Department reports on a video. What? Denigrate Russian democracy even more, but who believe? All right. Suitcase of green? Oh, well. Sounds solid. All right, so I guess we work something out. Okay, where to transfer it? Oh, yeah, sure. Sure, for Ukrainian Army. Yeah, they hella need it. Yeah, the link will be in the description below. Oh, yes. Yeah, thank you, yeah, goodbye. Well, you don't believe Freedom House? Good. Let's take a look at the iteration of power in these two states during the last 22 years. 5 presidents in Ukraine versus 2 in Russia, with the right of Putin to be re-elected 2 more times, thanks to the changes of the constitution in 2020. The main reasons for the war can be seen in the political system. Here we would like to quote from the article "Why Don't Democracies Fight Each Other?" An experimental study by Alex Mintz and Nehemiah Jeva. Political elites in democracies are less likely to engage in foreign conflicts because they are answerable to the public and willing to pay the cost of war in lives and resources. The probability of the use of force decreases as the level of domestic political constraints on the leader increases. At the same time, Russia is an autocracy, where institutional barriers are formal. But unlike the dictatorships of the past, the Russian regime uses other tools to control the population, Sergei Griev and Daniel Trisman drew attention to this in their article, Information Autocrats. The power of these regimes comes not from mass repressions, but from control over the media and the elimination of the opposition elite. The latter connects informational autocracies with democracies. In both cases, there is a struggle for minds, but in a dictatorship, this is a struggle given the monopoly on the media. Nevertheless, the authorities have to juggle topics, drawing attentions to victories and distracting from defeats. Whereas Hitler and Stalin sought to reshape citizens' goals and values by imposing comprehensive ideologies, informational autocrats intervened surgically, attempting only to convince citizens of their competence. Of course, democratic politicians would also like citizens to think of them as competent ones, and their public relation efforts are sometimes hard to distinguish from propaganda. In the article Why Don't Democracies Fight Each Other, we can see the interconnection between election and war. Often in an effort to rally the population around the flag, politicians resort to that sort of venture. Presidents in democratic countries are more likely to use force when their performance ratings in public opinion polls are problematic. Look, for example, on this graph. No, it's not a Putin's cardiogram given by another Western insider. This is his rating of support among the population of Russia, compiled by the Levada Center. In both 2014 and 2022, the invasion led to an increase in the level of approval of the authorities. It is important that the Russian government presents the war not as an invasion of Ukraine, but as a global confrontation with the collective West, represented by the anti-democratic authorities in Kiev, in order to enhance the effects of external threat. By the way, the Kremlin still does not call the war a war. For them, it's so-called special operation, so that no one would think of drawing parallels with the aggressive wars of the past. As David Sutter rightly pointed out in his article, For Russia's Real Reasons for War in Ukraine, the regime put in place by former President Boris Yeltsin and consolidated by President Vladimir Putin fears its own people. It uses foreign aggression to strengthen its hold on power. But why exactly Ukraine? In the future, Ukraine's path may become an alternative to the authoritarian part of the Russian government. If Ukraine manages to achieve significant success, then this can spur democratic movements in post-Soviet space. In addition, if the Russian Federation is able to put a pro-Russian government in Kiev, then the issue of legitimizing the status of the occupied Crimea and lifting sanctions will be resolved much faster. Given the recent years of stagnation in the Russian economy, an example of developed democracy in the future could destabilize the Russian system. Of course, Ukraine would be far from economically developed democracy, but the further this process went, the harder it would be to stop it. Having a country with opposing values, lifestyles, and systems at your border is a factor of instability. In Putin's opinion, Western democracy in essence is a threat to Russia's already. Let's take a look at the state structure of the Russian Federation. Yes, it is a federation, but it's a rigidly centralized state. Nominally, the republics have some rights, but all the power still flows through the institution of the presidency. Democracy in its early stages makes the state very vulnerable. When a country has not developed a political culture, 3 branches of power, and a politically educated society, its security can be threatened by many things. Destruction of an authoritarianism and the creation of a semblance of democracy would lead to a new national movement for a republic, republics of federation. Where these demands would stop and whether the central government would be able to cope with them is an open question. Now, let's talk about NATO. Because Russian propagandists often like to justify this war precisely by its expansion. Well, we could have been making an hour-length lecture about the history of interactions between Russia and NATO, and additionally trying to ram down your throat an idea that NATO is a strictly defensive alliance. But it seems to us somewhat delusional that relying on history and international relations is a winning strategy, especially nowadays when the political agenda changes so rapidly. So, the main argument in this discussion might be weapons of mass destruction. The acquisition of nuclear weapons by both sides transforms the nature of conflict. wherein, for example, occupation of Russian territory is highly unlikely, possession of nuclear power doesn't necessarily mean wiping off humanity off the face of the earth. There are gray zones existent, for example, usage of tactical nuclear weapons instead of strategic. All of that leads to a conclusion that nuclear weapons might be used, and the danger of that may well be even more present than at the times of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Yet it's absolutely devastating, a chilling topic, but the chances are existent. But there's one take while conducting a foreign policy. It's better to use force as a form of threat than to actually use it physically, at least from the point of resource depletion and consecutive cost after its usage. After renewed Russian incursion into Ukraine, preceding conventional wisdom of many respected newspapers is likely to change, as well as their assessments of the military power of both sides. Threatening democratic states, especially with nuclear weapons, has proven to be highly effective. It is just enough to slaughter that your country will face consequences that it's never been facing through the course of history, and Ukrainian allies are already not that eager to give Ukraine polished mix. So what if we're talking about military intervention? President making the decision takes on huge risks. Well, if seeing nuclear bombs falling on his country is not true in most cases, but the risks of being not elected again, are real. So if NATO is not the huge threat to Russia that Putin claims it to be, why did Putin invade Ukraine? Membership of Ukraine in the alliance would have led to the loss of Russian influence in this country. Destabilization of a neutral state is a much easier job to do than the disruption of NATO members. Additionally, having an unintegrated state under your influence is a powerful investment in terms of expansion of one's self-control. Frankly speaking, losing Ukraine to Russia means experiencing depletion of its capability to be a regional power. In addition, each new NATO member is minus one future ally in the Russian camp. On November 17, 2008, the Russian government approved a development plan called Strategy 2020. It was supposed to increase life expectancy by 2.5 years, GDP growth by 37 to 38%, growth of real disposable income of the population by 53 to 54%. But no, Russia has not achieved this. Over the decades of authoritarianism, Vladimir Putin and his henchmen have become synonym with the world power, and their interest has become synonymous with the national interest. The welfare of citizens was not on the agenda of this government. By manipulating society through hate propaganda, they were able to replace never again with we can repeat it. And the horror of the Second World War was replaced by Bucha, Irpin, Kramatorsk, and now Kremenchuk. True, they overestimated the system that they created and underestimated Ukraine's ability to resist. Dear viewers, thank you for watching this video and popularizing international relations topic with us. Please subscribe if you like. Your support is highly incentivizing. Donate to Ukrainian Army in the description below. Stay strong. Slava Ukraini! Героям слава!